It's my birthday and I have been looking for a chance to talk about one of my favourite films of all time. People may be wondering what my ultimate favourite film of all time is, and to be perfectly honest, I don't have one. Instead of like one movie I like above all others, I just have a cluster of films that I enjoy watching and rewatching from time to time. Anne of the Thousand Days is one of my favourites for many reasons. Acting, aesthetics, music, editing. And through my rankings lists, I've been hinting at certain elements of the film's background, but never been able to go into full detail. So I want to do that now as a special. If you haven't seen it by now, go and give it a watch. I can't really spoil it for you because it's already a given from the start of the movie that Henry VIII is going to execute Anne Boleyn, and this guy called Thomas Cromwell has something to do with it.
We fought with him.
I died for him.
I trusted him.
I loved him.
And me, I'm the damn fool that shot him.
Anne of the Thousand Days began life in 1948 as a stage play, written by Maxwell Anderson. It premiered at the Shubert Theatre on Broadway, starring Rex Harrison as Henry VIII and Joyce Redman as Anne Boleyn. The play was directed by Henry Codman Potter, and the success of the play was substantial. Rex Harrison would go on to win a Tony Award for his portrayal of the bloodthirsty English king. The show ran for a total of 288 performances before it ultimately closed. Now, when a play becomes this popular, the natural evolution of things is to adapt it into a film and cast the best actors Hollywood has to offer to star in it, and rake in the Oscars. Unfortunately, Anne of the Thousand Days had to wait 20 years to see itself on the big screen. The reason for this was due to a series of rules and restrictions which dictated what could and could not be shown to mainstream audiences. You know where I'm going with this, right? Yep, I'm talking about the Haze Code again. The Haze Code dominated Hollywood since 1934. Many films found clever ways to mould their story around these restrictions. You couldn't show childbirth or pregnancy, so in Gone with the Wind they used vague editing and silhouettes to depict a birthing scene. You couldn't have your main hero kill their wife and get away with it, so in Rebecca they changed the titular character's death, so instead she dies from a fall, which Maxim isn't sure if he caused it or not. But there were also a lot of terrible restrictions in there too, and others that were just plain baffling. Two people of different races were not allowed to be love interests. A married couple were not allowed to sleep in the same bed. Criminals were not allowed to be given sympathetic traits. And no swearing. MGM had to fight tooth and nail just so Clark Gable could have his classic line.
Where will I go? What'll I do?
Frankly, my dear, I love you. Let's remarry.
Oh, what a lovely ending. They cut out the best word.
Because Anne of the Thousand Days featured a man killing his wife and getting away with it, along with political corruption, murder in general, mention of incest, actual adultery and the denigration of the Catholic Church, there was no way a film adaptation would be approved under the height of the Haze Code's authority. Over the passing of time, the code became more unpopular and became more of a hindrance to filmmaking when television and foreign cinema competed for attention. The beginning of the end was the release of the 1959 film Some Like It Hot, which was not approved by the Haze Code, but nonetheless went on to be a critical and commercial hit. Throughout the 1960s, films kept testing the limits until eventually the Haze Code was abandoned in 1968, and then Barbra Streisand danced on its grave. Because the end of the Haze Code was inevitable, production for the film of Anne of the Thousand Days went ahead. The film was shot on location at Hever Castle and Penshurst Place, as well as on sets at Pinewood Studios. As everyone knows, Hever Castle was the childhood home of Anne Boleyn, and would be the first film about her to be filmed there. Other Tudor period pieces include the BBC Shakespeare Collection's Henry VIII and the 2008 film of The Other Boleyn Girl. It would be produced by Hal B. Wallace and directed by Charles Jarrott, or Jarrett, one of the two. The music was provided by French composer Georges Delerue. It was released in America on the 18th of December 1969, so it could be considered by the Academy Awards. The casting was one of the most controversial aspects of the film's production, but let's go through the supporting cast first before we touch on our two leads.
I must have a son.
Get one then. On one of your women. I'm your wife and your queen, and neither you nor the Pope can make my child a bastard.
Catherine of Aragon, Henry VIII's first wife, was played by Greek actress Irene Pappas. She worked primarily in Greek, French and Italian cinema beforehand, but gained international recognition as Maria in The Guns of Navarone. The Legatine court speech, which Catherine was so famous for, was filmed for the movie but didn't make the final cut.
Brilliant, Your Grace, brilliant.
You think so?
Yes. Keep promising her marriage and the siege will soon be over. In a month at most, you'll have breached her.
You think I was lying?
Well, if wooing, praise, gifts and power have failed, then of course you must try a new strategy.
Cardinal Thomas Wolsey was played by Anthony Quayle, who was a Shakespearean actor through and through. He played one of the guards in Laurence Olivier's Hamlet, narrated the CBS version of The Six Wives of Henry VIII, and played John Falstaff in the BBC Shakespeare collections Henry IV Parts 1 and 2. In the animated film The Thief and the Cobbler, he voiced King Nod, but passed away before the film's release, as did quite a few other actors on that film.
I am a lawyer who has read the law.
So?
There is a law of this land that says it is treason to acknowledge any higher authority than the will of the king. It is, I take it, the will of the king that he shall divorce the queen and marry the Lady Anne.
It is?
Then the church in England must grant your will, because it is treasonable to say that the Pope is a higher authority than the king under the law.
Thomas Cromwell was played by Canadian actor Jean Colicos. Other than Cromwell, he has played Aaron Burr, Sir, on 2 different occasions, as well as Jesus Christ himself in The Man Born to be King. For you Star Trek fans out there, he is also known for playing the Klingon officer Kor.
And where is the king?
At Richmond, out hunting.
Will you join him later?
No, by God, for me there's killing enough this day.
Thomas Howard, Duke of Norfolk and Anne Boleyn's uncle, was played by Peter Jeffrey. For ages, I kept thinking he was Anthony Ainley because he has the persona and look of a classic Doctor Who villain. Well, turns out he was a Doctor Who villain. He was in the Tom Baker serial Androids of Tara as Count Grendel, basically a combination of Scar, Jafar and Hades. Jeffrey later reprised his role as a Duke of Norfolk in Julian Fellowes' adaptation of The Prince and the Pauper.
One never gets used to these things. There is always a hell to go through. When a girl gives herself so completely...
You know why I gave myself to the king?
Thomas Boleyn, Anne's father, was played by Michael Hordern, who was a lieutenant commander in World War II on the HMS Illustrious. He worked primarily on television, stage and radio, though he also appeared in 140 films. In the Elizabeth Taylor epic Cleopatra, he played Roman politician Cicero.
I pray you, Master Kingston, see me safe up. As for my coming down, let me shift for myself.
Thomas More, as you can see I'm just going through the Thomases, was played by William Squire. This film was released a year after the Best Picture winning A Man for All Seasons, and whether it was coincidental or not, Squire bears a striking resemblance to Paul Schofield. Squire is probably best known for voicing Gandalf in the 1978 animated version of The Lord of the Rings.
Sir Thomas.
My Lord Bishop?
Shall you, in your conscience, accept the annulment if the decision is for the king?
The Pope has finally answered the king's appeal and has sent Cardinal Campeggio to try this case. Campeggio speaks for His Holiness. I will accept that.
I shall speak against it while I have breath.
Bishop, later Cardinal John Fisher, was played by Joseph O'Connor. He had a distinct voice which stuck with me subconsciously. So one day my sister and I are watching The Dark Crystal, and the narrator sounds eerily familiar. My sister thought it was Tony J, you know, Frollo, but that was not Frollo. So we had to look it up. And Joseph O'Connor was the narrator. He also played Mr. Brownlow in the film adaptation of Oliver. Richard Burton played Henry VIII. He was, to put it nicely, a toxic mess of a person. He hated his performance and the film, but most especially, he hated Genevieve Bejold, who played Anne Boleyn. Hal Wallace initially wanted Olivia Hussey to play Anne. Meanwhile, another actress had her own motives for taking the role. One, Elizabeth Taylor, aka Richard Burton's off-again, on-again wife. Theirs was a passionate and confusing relationship which annoyed and inconvenienced everyone around them. Bit like the real Antony and Cleopatra. Taylor was denied the role due to being 37. Yes, even though Anne Boleyn was 35 at most when she died, and Liz Taylor looked much younger than she actually was. But you know how ageist Hollywood is to women. Nothing's changed. This didn't stop her from sneaking onto the set. She was incredibly possessive of Burton and suspected that he was having an affair with Genevieve Bejold. Bejold herself was furious with the contempt she received from Burton and Taylor. Knowing this makes sense, and it's very noticeable in their performances.
I've heard what your courtiers say, and I've seen what you are. You're spoiled and vengeful and bloody. Your poetry is sour and your music is worse. You make love as you eat, with a good deal of noise and no subtlety.
There's actually a scene where Taylor appears on screen in a Tudor gown, though she's behind a mask. She was paid a total of $46, about $390 today, for that cameo. In probably the most famous scene of the movie, where Anne delivers her lacerating monologue to Henry about how Elizabeth will be greater than any king Henry sires with Jane Seymour, Bejold's anger is real. Liz Taylor was on set during the filming of that scene, and just before they started rolling, Bejold went to Charles Jarrow and said, "I am going to give that bitch an acting lesson she will never forget." I've already mentioned how much I enjoy Genevieve Bejold as Anne Boleyn. She was number one on my rankings for a reason. She gave Anne Boleyn a headstrong nature, who was also affectionate and clever. She is also the only version of Anne Boleyn to have a French accent. Claire Foy's version in Wolf Hall did a few inflections, but Anne of the Thousand Days used Bejold's French-Canadian heritage to the film's advantage, and made Anne distinct from the rest of the Tudor court. Bejold acted in Canadian, French and American productions, this being her first English language film. For a brief time, she was Captain Janeway in Star Trek Voyager, but after the filming began, she quit the role because it was too much for her. Upon the film's release, Anne of the Thousand Days received mixed reviews. Although the cast was given glowing praise, especially Bejold, the pacing of the film was heavily criticised as being too slow. However, the film was considered a commercial hit, and was one of the highest grossing movies at the UK box office in 1970. And because it was released at the right time, Universal Pictures started pushing the film in front of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Universal invited Academy members to screenings of the film and would serve them champagne and filet mignon afterwards. See, this was back when they would actually put financially successful movies in the running for Best Picture. As a result, the film was nominated for 10 Oscar categories. Best Picture, Best Actor for Richard Burton, Best Actress for Genevieve Bejold, Best Supporting Actor for Anthony Quayle, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Original Score that isn't a musical, and Best Sound. Out of all these nominations, Anne of the Thousand Days only won one Oscar, and that was Best Costume Design. Midnight Cowboy won Best Picture, while Burton lost Best Actor to John Wayne of all people. Yes, John Cardboard Republican Wayne. Bejold lost Best Actress to Maggie Smith, which I can't fault because anyone who's grown up in the 2000s knows Maggie Smith was a legend. And still is. She's still alive for now. Crap, I've jinxed it. The film also won Best Motion Picture Drama at the Golden Globes, along with Best Director for Charles Jarrow. Again, I'm flip-flopping here on how I pronounce this. Best Actress for Genevieve Bejold, and Best Screenplay for John Hale, Bridget Boland, and Richard Sokolov. I think what draws me to this movie is its unashamed depiction of showing the Tudor era in all its colour and style, and having this character-driven narrative between two people whose hate and love for each other changed the face of a nation. A lot of the Tudor dramas made in the late 60s and early 70s were like this. They wanted to be dramatic and authentic, something which modern versions just don't have anymore. Anne of the Thousand Days is not the most historically accurate film, but it's honest, and it isn't embarrassed to be talking about history. It doesn't have Anne breaking the fourth wall and explaining to the audience who everyone is. It doesn't have needless sex scenes with boobs hanging out. It has characters undertake naturally progressing arcs, not make them unforgivably mean, only for them to turn around and force you to sympathise with them. I like the Tudors because it has good actors, and though it doesn't look accurate on the surface, it follows events closely, and usually has a historical basis for the changes they make, first season accepted. Wolf Hall is great, there just isn't enough of it. Becoming Elizabeth had accurate costumes, but a hectic production and its portrayal of Thomas Seymour hindered its success. I like a piece of media that isn't embarrassed by its subject matter. It doesn't feel it has to lower itself to attract all audiences. It doesn't talk down to people, it treats you like a grown-up. I was about 14 when I first saw this movie, and I understood it perfectly. And for a long time it will be remembered more fondly than all the imitators that have failed to bring Tudor history to life because the creators couldn't be bothered to make anything good. By the way, did you know this film has a sequel? Yes, Charles Jarrow and Hal B. Wallace collaborated once again to make the 1971 film of Mary Queen of Scots. The film has some references to Anne of the Thousand Days, such as a conversation between Elizabeth and Robin Dudley at the beginning.
Beautiful, Robin, beautiful. You write songs as well as you sing them.
Your Majesty, the composer of such a melody rises far above my poor talent. I came across the tune when I was looking through some old manuscripts at the Greenwich Palace. I thought it might amuse you to hear it.
Well, who wrote it?
It is said that your father composed it for your blessed mother, Anne Boleyn, before they were married.
Oh?
It is also said that when he asked her how she liked it, she countered by asking him how his wife liked it.
This song I heard in my mind when I woke from a troubled sleep. I wrote it down at once without a correction. It sings what is truly in my heart. If some young man wrote this song for you, Anne, what would you say of it?
I would ask him how his wife liked it, Your Grace.
By God, my mother had the courage of 10, and so have you, you horse.
And both films feature a fictitious meeting between the condemner and the condemned, where the former urges the latter to save their own life, only for the latter to refuse and die. The difference between the two films is Henry brushes off Anne's death and carries on to create more misery, while Elizabeth stops to mourn Mary. Elizabeth became every bit the queen Anne wanted her to be, but she was still cursed with her father's need to kill those who threatened them or hurt their pride. While I don't think a remake of this film is necessary, I would be interested in seeing a film based on the making of it. You get those now and again. I like the idea of casting Kristen Stewart as Genevieve Bejold, especially after the Spencer movie with the whole Anne Boleyn thing, and Gemma Arterton can play Elizabeth Taylor. I'm not sure who you get to play Richard Burton. Maybe Colin Farrell. Depends on if he can recreate the baritone voice Burton had. And that was my short little birthday video about the crazy story behind the making of Anne of the Thousand Days. So I know this movie means a lot to many people, so I wanted to talk about it and maybe encourage some people to go and look at it. Some people have told me that they've gone to actually watch the movie because they've seen me talk about it on this channel, and it's worth a watch. So coming up in May, I really want to get the Lady Jane Grey rankings out, hopefully. I'm sure I will, at some point, maybe. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We've also got some more Titanic videos coming out. And a big thank you to my patrons who support the channel. You can support the channel yourself by becoming a patron today. Link is in the description. Thank you so much to my King and Queen patrons, Alison Cuff, Jill Mynero, Larissa and Leslie Williams.
Ladies and gentlemen, here for the singing of our national anthem, accompanied by the President's own United States Marine Band, please welcome Lady Gaga.